Hi, I am Josh, and today I'm going to be reviewing for you Shirley Chisholm, a biography by Anastasia Curwood. This book is comprehensive and at times overwhelming in its details, but it is also fascinating and just really intriguing. It was really revealing about the life of Shirley Chisholm, which is why I think it's a book that is worth considering reading and a book worth discussing. So I'm going to do my best here to discuss what this book provides and why I think you should consider giving it a go. Let me start with my own relationship to Shirley Chisholm, because she's a figure from the 70s who, I don't want to say she's forgetful, but as a white, masculine individual who grew up in the South, she was someone that I had never heard about. And even in my adulthood, it wasn't until I watched Miss America, the miniseries about trying to pass the ERA during the 70s and I guess early 80s, that I came across Shirley Chisholm as a figure. And I was really intrigued, honestly, not just by her, but the entire suite of individuals in that narrative about trying to pass the ERA. And obviously, Miss America, its critiques in some ways were good about the problems with that feminist movement, and that sort of connects to Shirley Chisholm's role and position in politics and also in the feminist movement during her time. But at the same time, I think it may have been a little too kind on some of the figures and how it treated Chisholm after reading this book. But nevertheless, Chisholm was one of the many people that I just found myself really intrigued by. So imagine my excitement when I see this book listed on NetGalley. I naturally had to request it. The book came out, I think, November or so of 2022. I meant to read it sooner, unfortunately, but then to my surprise, in January, it actually got an audio release, which I think is a great resource for this book, because it's one of those books that is just so detailed that it really helps to have the audio to sort of guide you through this narrative of her life. The book itself is a university press publication. You can tell there is an academic side to it, but I don't want that to turn you off from the book, though, because while it is academic in nature, I think it's still intended for the lay audience. It just means that we're getting a lot of details. Like it does seem suited to an academic press, and that is both overwhelming but also just like really exciting as a reader who's interested in learning about her. There was so much about her that is not known, and even at the beginning of the book, the author talks about how previous biographies and previous parts of history have gotten things wrong, have missed things, have mischaracterized things, just due to a failure of historians, and also, of course, the inherent biases that exist in history, how people in power tend to perceive history and how they're the ones who write history. So we get this look now at Shirley Chisholm in a new way that sort of revisits her as a candidate, as a person, as a politician, and of course as the first ever black person and black woman candidate for president. At the same time, the book it's not just a giant idolization of Chisholm. She is very much a politician, and the book does not shy away from that, which I felt like was satisfying. Like, I want to see the true her. And the reality is, you don't make it far in politics without being able to be a politician in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that she's as bad as some. I just think that she knew how to use her charisma and talk in a way that was necessary for a good politician. It's interesting, too, to think about her, some of the things that she did and how it compares to the modern day. I mean, her as a candidate, as the first black woman candidate, made a lot of people angry. She was going against not just the Democratic Party and the establishment, she was going against other black leaders who felt like the first candidate should be a man, or at the very least we should discuss it first before she just puts herself out there. And so she's really challenging the system in the same way that, say, in a very different extent, to be clear, say Bernie Sanders, how he tried to challenge the system and how they both tried to push the system in a certain direction. Again, that analogy only goes so far, as he is a cishet white man and she is a black woman who's the center of black feminism, as well as poverty, analyzing and fighting poverty and just inequalities in America at large. That's really where they sort of intersect, is the inequality discussion. But really, it's the way in which they challenge the existing power structure that is intriguing. And it's this conversation to be had about what ways are they effective and what ways does this approach end up hindering their long-term goals? I'm not in a place to say what that answer is, and I don't think the author attempts to give a firm answer of what that is, or rather doesn't herself attempt to give a firm answer to those questions. But they're questions that are inevitably risen when we start to consider her and the type of person that she was. With all of that said, let me just give a brief rundown of her life. Chisholm's career starts out as an educator, and isn't until a certain point in her life that she decides to consider entering politics. I don't remember enough to get into the details here. I just thought it's an important part of her life structure was her role in education. That is to say, the fact that she spent time in education would end up coming back up in her politics later on as she tried to fight for better systems of education and fighting systems of inequalities within education. But when she entered politics, she really just redefined, or rather tried her best to sort of challenge the system of authority there in ways that I've kind of already alluded to. From the get-go, she was pretty forward and aggressive in all the best ways to try and make a difference. She didn't want to be pushed to the wayside, and she wasn't afraid to challenge the people in power and call them out for sexist and racist decisions. For example, at first she felt like she wanted to go into a particular committee. I think it was the Educational Committee in Congress or something of that nature. And instead she got put into, I think, agriculture or something of that nature. And it wasn't just her, though. She was one of a few set of black Congress people who were all put into these fields that felt very stereotypical in a very racist sense. And she called them out. I believe she ended up getting her committee changed, but not to where she wanted to go. But still, she forced them to reanalyze where she was at, to try and put herself in a position to be able to make change in a way that, in things that matter to her. These are things like education, poverty, existing structures of sexism and racism. From the very get-go, that's something that is very apparent in her career. It sets her up as this sort of, I don't want to say wild card, but a person who's not afraid to stand up to the system, maybe ruffle some feathers. And when we reflect on the story of her life, that it's all very easy to see how this would lead to her running for president. And in this time where she doesn't necessarily think, nobody really thinks she has a chance of winning, not even her, but she sees it as a way of challenging the assumption that a black woman can't run. And it's to say that yes, we can, and it's about proving the ability of black women, black people and women to coalesce to form a strong, uniform bond. Ultimately, I think she does not necessarily see what she wants to from that type of structure. She doesn't get the unity that she wants. Even the people who say or seem to be her friends, people like popular feminist leaders of the time, would show support, but they wouldn't actually take a stand. And it's one of those things that, again, I think alludes to modern politics and how people can say they have certain politics, but in a certain position, they're not necessarily comfortable with really taking a stand in some places. I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. I think it's a complex question of, am I causing more division in making this decision, or am I really pushing the envelope in what society is comfortable with and willing to question and consider, and we consider rather. Ultimately, during her time in Congress and running for president, she managed to accomplish or passing some significant bills or bills that were important to her. But many of the times, she was not necessarily effective, not necessarily successful at getting through what she wanted. I think there was one point where she did get a minimum wage change that finally, even though it was extremely difficult to do, and it was during a time when I think Nixon was in office. And there are just little things like that where you can see her pushing for change and sometimes succeeding, but many times failing. But it's one of those things that it's not easy to really judge. Let me phrase that. It's not always one-to-one comparison to consider what role she played in making change. Because it's one of those things, like I said before, of pushing the envelope. You can't just change things overnight. You have to make people open to even considering whether something might be problematic or whether something needs to be changed. And I think that's something that, in retrospect, it's just so easy to see that she did. And that's why she remains this major figure that a lot of people look up to. Even some modern politicians like, say, Maxine Waters, they worked with her, and they talk about the role she played in their long-term decisions to enter politics and to challenge the status quo. While it's easy to dismiss her as someone who was unsuccessful in a lot of ways, what is important is to be able to reflect and realize how significant a figure she played during the 70s, during that time, and how it would inevitably lead to what we have today. I'm not saying today is some magical new world, but she inspired a lot of people and motivated them to really challenge status quo. And now the idea of a black woman running for president, it's not revolutionary. It's not something that seems so out of the blue. I think you sort of get my point here. I'm trying my best to be comprehensive here, but there's just so much I'm trying to talk about, and I'm being unsuccessful. And the more unsuccessful I am, the more I'm starting to stumble with my words. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, because I think I've sort of conveyed my main points here. We study her life, we study her role as a politician, the things she strove for, and we reflect on the things that she was able to pass and not able to pass, and her long-term legacy and effect on modern politics and just on the country at large. Chisholm is someone who has been so underappreciated, whose role has been underestimated. And I just feel like it's important that we are willing to reflect and revisit her as an important figure in history, and to just give her the time to be remembered and to consider her role there. And I'm saying all this because I really think this is a really good book, and it's one that I think many people should consider, because I don't think Shirley Chisholm is a figure who gets the attention she deserves. I just highly recommend this book, and it was really well written. So very comprehensive. The structure itself didn't feel very revolutionary, but I think it's still very effective at giving you so much knowledge about her life, and I strongly recommend it. That's the takeaway here. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Please tell me if you're going to consider giving it a go. I definitely think you should. Again, the audiobook was released on Audible. When I read it, it didn't even have a cover yet, so I don't think many people have listened to it or read it. So this is a book that you should consider getting ahead of everyone else. Get ahead of the curve and give it a go. Have a great day, stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.